Okay, so this final section, I'm going to talk about the system properties of sustainability and resilience, even though that hasn't really been in the readings. It's not part of the Meadows readings. So don't think you've accidentally missed it. This will relate to the initial readings we did last week, and we'll come back to this later in the semester. But this is just a sort of a general, how do we use these concepts and this thinking, excuse me, to start talking about sustainable communities, resilient communities, and what are those system properties that we would like to have in our community system design. So we're going to talk about self-organization a little bit more and what some of the dimensions of a resilient system would be. Excuse me, it's the air quality. I'm going to start sniffing now. So resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change so as to retain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and feedbacks. Now that's the definition of resilience. And a resilient system is less vulnerable to disturbances. Do we want all our systems to be, all human systems to be resilient? I would say no, we just want the good ones to be resilient. Just going to mute myself for a second. May you not get the smoke. So where does the word resilience really come from in systems thinking? Again, it really comes from studying ecosystems and ecological systems. And so I think the sense of the identity of the system has to stay the same for it to be a resilient system makes a lot of sense in ecology, because you have people valuing particular ecological system states, however you want to call it. It's from the beginnings of ecology as a science, there was the ecological community and the climax ecosystem, and very, very value-laden descriptions and definitions, because people get very attached to certain versions of ecosystems. And then you have the opposing trend of the hard-nosed scientific quantitative ecosystems people who tended more to talk about nutrient cycling and much more abstract ecosystem functions, which are, in which a certain role can be played by any number of species. How do we translate that to human systems? I think that the identity, or if you think back to the Meadows reading, the identity, the purpose, the function in human systems, a human system is organized for some purpose, and it's, as Meadows says, sometimes the purpose is the stated one, and sometimes the purpose is unstated ones. And so when we look around at our society today, we can see things about our system that seem to be part of how it functions, that are morally indefensible. So to the extent that systemic racism is a part of our economy, we would morally want to change the system. We would not want that part of the system to be resilient. We would want to change our systems sufficiently so that racism is no longer systemic. So when we're talking, we have to be a little bit careful when we're talking about some of these ecological concepts. We can't completely import them to human systems, even though we do it all the time. We have been doing it since the 1880s. We need to put that moral theory lens on some of these concepts. So there was one student in the class that said that he was studying moral philosophy, and I expect that he'll be, you know, every group will want that person. He will hear, he will understand the sort of moral philosophy points I'm trying to make here. Need to review, make sure that the system we're trying to protect and make more resilient is morally good. And that raises a whole lot of other issues about how do you define that. And we have one moral philosopher in the class, so that's good. A sustainable system technically will have resilience. Sorry, I just skipped over that part. So if you think about the peanut butter case, we had, it's a system where we had that central facility having just one of them, or very few number, a very, small number of plants. I've been doing this for a while. I'm starting to lose my words. I feel like one bad peanut spoils the whole bag. One bad factory spoils the whole continent. I should actually come back to this. I should define these things first and then come back. I thought I had done that in my outline. Resilient systems are characterized by diversity. So we have a diversity of actors, a diversity of supplies, a diversity of supply channels, a diversity of ways of making a living. Thinking again about ecosystems, highly diverse ecosystems tend to be more resilient as systems. And you have, so then, and hopefully all those things are also going to add up to a diversity of ideas and strategies. Modularity, it's another idea that's beside diversity. Modularity is, in the peanut butter example, instead of having one peanut paste factory, you might have 10 modules. So that then if you detect salmonella, and you could even, it can still be centralized and still be modular. If you have salmonella in one of the modules, you can, it's easier to press stop on 1/10 of your production than 100% of your production, right? So that's the idea of modularity, is that you have a module that you can pull out and most of the system will keep functioning. In train car, in the train transportation, we have modules of those storage, the boxes that can go on the boats or on the trains, or those are modules in that system. So in a food system, you would have smaller scale sites of production. Modularity, in order for a farm to be modular, it would have to have fields in different places that are going to be affected by different kinds of weather. The other thing of a resilient system, or one that is more likely to be resilient to disturbance, it will have tight feedbacks. And so thinking way back to my restaurant example, if I am a restaurateur and I serve you something that has 4 times the amount of goat cheese that anyone should ever be asked to taste, and I say, blech, That's a very, if I say that right away as soon as I taste it, then that's a very tight feedback loop, and you can apologize all over. I can apologize all over myself and remove the offending whack of goat cheese, and bring you something good to eat. There's a little bit of opinion, a little bit of personal experience in this, and that would be a very tight feedback loop. And I would probably still come to your restaurant, or the restaurant, you know, the customer restaurateur relationship would be preserved, and there's no, you know, there's no real slowdown in the flow there of money and food, because that was a really tight feedback loop. If I don't say blah, then as a restaurateur, if I as a customer don't say blah, then I as a restaurateur don't get that feedback right away. So sometimes, you know, manners can actually interfere with the tightness of a feedback loop. You're going to want to know how you're doing on your assignments probably faster than my feedback loop is going to tell you. You're going to want to know faster. Is there something I should change? Should I take away this assignment full of goat cheese and do another one right away? So there's a real value to tightness in feedback loops. And what's the opposite of that? Well, sometimes it's delay, like in the examples in the Meadows chapters. If you think about, again, I keep talking about food, but if you think about how farmers decide what they're going to plant. If it's fall, I've harvested my what I planted in the spring, and I've got a good yield of eggplant, and I've got a good yield of carrots, and my carrots sell out right away, and for whatever reason I still have many eggplants. And so the decision that I made was, when I ordered seed back in February, when I ordered half eggplant and half carrot. I get the feedback now in September, and I can use that information next February when I'm deciding whether I should order, you know, carrots. Maybe I shouldn't even try to grow eggplant. Maybe I should just grow carrots and beets. But I have to make that decision in February, and I won't get the feedback from that until probably September. I might get the feedback from that earlier if it turns out I've chosen a crop that won't grow well here. So that makes, that's a form of vulnerability that's in the farming system. You know, we can't design that delayed feedback away from a farming system. So we set up things to help farmers deal with that risk in some cases. You know, I buy a share from a local farmer every year where I get my produce, and I pick up the box from a local garage every Tuesday. And we got an email that she got frost on her farm already, so we only have 2 boxes left of vegetables this year. The way that we, you know, that's a vulnerability that her business has, and to help her deal with that level of risk as a community, those of us that sign up for this, we pay the money in February or March. So however the summer goes, so our fridges go. And we do that in order that we can have local produce. Anyway, I'm skating a bit away from tightness of feedbacks. Some feedback delays can't be designed away. Other feedback delays, we can change how soon people hear about it if they've done something bad. We can alter that sometimes through policy, through regulation. We can internalize how people think about the costs of their pollution or their littering, we can make that response time, that information they get back, that fine, whatever, we can shorten that feedback loop through policy and regulation. So resilient food system would be diverse in supply, diverse in producers, would not likely be completely reliant on the local, because many disturbances are local or regional. There was a windstorm went through Iowa, 100 mile an hour winds, 6 million acres of corn. Speaking of not very diverse or resilient food system, Iowa's all about hogs, but if you had a locally reliant food system somewhere in the southern half of the state of Iowa, you'd be in trouble. You would design your food system to be modular, with likely many more smaller producers, although that's partly the modularity and partly the how do you want your community to be? Do you want kids in the schools? Do you want more people making a living or fewer? If you wanted a resilient food system, you would probably want to strengthen the producer-consumer networks. And that example I gave about Rachel and her frost talks about it's rebalancing the risk from what's borne entirely by the farmer to what's shared between the farmer and the consumer. You definitely would want as many tight feedbacks as you can, both sort of natural to the system and regulatory or designed. Resilient food system would have diversity, modularity, tightness of feedbacks. Back to the peanut butter example, clearly there's a lack of diversity it's actually not peanut butter, it's peanut paste. I knew this was supposed to be here and not back there in the outline. Anyway. There's little modularity in that peanut paste system as the network goes through one point. And there was a nice tight feedback loop right in the factory, but it didn't work. So it did not have sufficient, energy behind it to actually stop the distribution and the deaths. And the way the peanut butter system is organized is the way that much of our industrial food system is organized. It's the energy of the economies of scale and the energies of centralization, all that reduce our per unit cost. That is such a big energy put on that we have introduced we have created a system that is much more vulnerable to certain kinds of risks and disturbances than could otherwise be, and we've produced a system that is not fully resilient to the kind of disturbances that we're seeing. So how do you translate that to what would a resilient community be? Well, hopefully we'll talk about that more the rest of the semester. But if one part of that community system, you think about the food and the transportation and the healthcare and if one part of it gets destroyed, the shock will not ripple through the entire system and make it lose its identity. Like, the shock doesn't destroy the community and everybody moves away. For example, if you have a one industry town, say you have a mill that most of the jobs in the town rely on, you'd want to diversify that economy so that the whole thing doesn't fall apart if the mill closes, ideally. You'd want a wide diversity of solutions or systems developed creatively in response to local circumstances. And a resilient community could meet its needs even if there's like a substantial disruption in travel and transport. So, or a substantial disruption in electricity service. A resilient community would have some resilient systems in place. Like a little propane stove on everyone, a hand coffee grinder for everyone, and a little propane stove for everyone. Okay, thank you very much.